Good afternoon. My name is Max Latona, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Ethics and Society at St. Anselm College. I am pleased to welcome all of you here on this webinar to this afternoon's program entitled Business in a Time of Disinformation. Today's program takes place as part of our Ethics in Governance Forum, and as the latest installment in our series, Corporations and the Common Good, which explores whether and how businesses should respond to social issues. We think this series is important. Ethics is more complex and meaningful than simply a list of rules and regulations that we follow. Ethics is about doing those things that can help individuals and organizations to achieve their potential and to flourish. But none of us live and function in isolation. Every individual and every organization is part of a society that has its own customs, its own mores, traditions, beliefs, and political practices. And this makes ethics more difficult, since when we ask about the right thing to do, we must consider not only ourselves and our own organizations, but the welfare of others in the community around us. And at the same time, as individuals and organizations, we are dependent on society for our own well-being. As Aristotle once remarked, it's easy to be virtuous in a just society, but very difficult to be good if the society around you is corrupt. But just how corporations handle these tensions between themselves and their communities and society is really the subject of this series that explores corporations and the common good. Funding for this ethics and governance program and this series comes from a $2 million endowment created by the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office and the Center for Public Responsibility and Corporate Citizenship, awarded to St. Anselm College in 2013. The endowment was created from a settlement reached between the New Hampshire Securities Bureau and Tyco International in 2002, and it's administered by the University of New Hampshire Foundation. To learn more about the forum and our work and corporations in the common good series, I encourage you to visit our website, anselm.edu/ethics. Now, please note that after our speakers' remarks, you'll have a chance to ask questions and offer comments, but please do so using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. In fact, if you have thoughts or comments while the remarks are being made, it's perfectly okay to put those questions and comments in the Q&A section, lest you forget them. So we'll have a record of them, and our moderator will be happy to ask and offer your comments at the conclusion of our speaker's remarks. Also, in accordance with New Hampshire state law, I'm obligated to inform you that we are recording this session. Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker and our moderator for today. Our speaker is Dr. Robert McNulty. Following a career in international business consulting for over 2 decades, Dr. Robert McNulty's professional focus has been on ethics in its theoretical and its applied forms. For 14 years, he worked at Bentley University, initially teaching in the philosophy department, and then for 13 years as the director of programs at the Hoffman Center for Business Ethics. There, he launched the Bentley Business for Peace initiative to focus on ways businesses can advance stability and peace in regions facing serious conflicts. He served on the steering committee of the United Nations Global Compact Business for Peace initiative, and was the inaugural co-chair of the UN's Principles for Responsible Management Education, Business for Peace Working Group. Robert is also the founder of the nonprofit organization Applied Ethics, Inc., the main work of which is the Pax Populi People-to-People Peace Building Initiative, which provided online educational services to students living in Afghanistan from 2010 until the return to power of the Taliban in August of 21. The organization then redeployed its program to support some of the 80,000 Afghan immigrants and refugees who came to the United States, many with little knowledge of English or American culture. Earlier, Robert held business leadership roles in New York, Jakarta, and Singapore, where he specialized in creating and applying communication strategies to assist countries in their economic development efforts, as well as their corporate communication programs. Our moderator today is my own colleague and friend, Dr. Dina Frutos-Bencze. Dr. Frutos-Bencze is an associate professor of international business at St. Anselm College. She has over 9 years of professional experience in human resources management in Europe and the US, Her most recent research has been focused on economic inequality, sustainable development, and entrepreneurial activity. Other research interests include economic integration, innovation, and the application of system dynamics modeling to international business. So with that, I want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us today, but I especially want to thank Dr. McNulty and Dina for serving as speaker and moderator. Dr. McNulty, I now yield the floor to you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Let me share my screen. Okay, I hope that's visible to everybody. And I hope you can all hear me. So I am absolutely delighted to be here. And I want to thank the Center for Ethics in Society, and in particular, Professor Max Latona and Professor Dina Frutos-Bencze, as well as Ms. Hannah Beaudry. And I'm also I want to say thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day to be with me while I discuss the topics of this in this webinar. I believe the topic I have taken on is a very, very important one. And I think it's one that is not an easy topic to discuss. And I want to say from the very beginning that I spent the last 30 years of my life, more than 30 years of my life, focusing on ethics. And I'm trying very much to look at this as impartially as I can from an ethical perspective, in wanting to find solutions for societal problems. And yet I know that I'm touching on a topic that can be, socially controversial on occasions and sometimes divisive. But I do so not with the intention of in any way trying to take sides or, create any kind of additional tensions for a topic that is already focusing on difficult issues. So let me begin. I want to, since we have a full hour almost, I wanted to go back to about 500 BC. And we figure that's a little over 2,500 years. And so hopefully we can get everything covered between that then and now. But one of the things that I wanted to mention is that when we think of the origins of democracy in the world, we are always referring to Athens. But the fact is that Rome became a democracy around the same time as Athens, and it stayed a democracy for almost 500 years. And so that was a very important innovation and quite a successful form of government that spread out from the little small dark area to then all the other areas and around the world, around basically the Mediterranean. In 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was assassinated, and there was three people that were called the triumvirate that took over the leadership again under the rule of the Senate. And those three were a man named Octavian, Mark Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. And they were supposed to be continuing in the spirit of that had been going on for the previous almost over 400 years. However, Octavian was the adopted son of Julius Caesar and a very ambitious man, and he really didn't like the idea of sharing power with Mark Antony or Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. And so it didn't take very long for him to get rid of Lepidus, but Mark Antony was a little bit more difficult to get rid of because of his popularity and his successes and his stature within the Roman society. So he set himself out to basically create a disinformation campaign against Mark Antony. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's one of the very early examples of a very explicit disinformation campaign. And Mark Antony was, he had a very famous girlfriend. Her name was Cleopatra. Rumor has it she looked a lot like Elizabeth Taylor, and she was apparently quite because both Julius Caesar and Antony had affairs with her, but Mark Antony had some children with her as well. So Octavian thought, okay, well, that's a good way of getting him. He started kind of suggesting that Antony is not a real Roman. And then he did this thing. They didn't have computers back then, but they did have coins. And he started making coins. That's supposed to be Cleopatra. She doesn't look all that great there to me, but anyways, I presume she really was. And that is supposed to be Mark Antony. And he put rather nasty comments on them and had them circulate throughout Roman society. And then basically did what he could to undermine and build a sense of contempt and anger about Mark Antony, suggesting that his loyalties were not with the Roman Republic, which was entirely false. His purpose was simply to get rid of Mark Antony. Well, this actually resulted in a civil war. And in this particular painting, it's depicting the battle between the forces of Octavian and the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And it was Octavian who won. And so that then led to Octavian being the sole person who was leading Rome. And excuse me, he then elevated himself to the position of emperor. He came under the name of Caesar Augustus, and he ended the republic. It was no longer a republic, it was an empire. And so we see that this disinformation really had massive consequences because it brought down an entire 400, almost 500-year-old republic and turned it into essentially a dictatorship, which is what an empire is with an emperor. Now, I want to connect this all to the role of ethics in business, and then I will later bring this back and talk about disinformation, because this is something that I think is a very important topic we're dealing with now. And I want to begin by the very beginning by saying that there's no such thing as business without ethics. Ethics, you can't engage in business without engaging in ethics. People pretend that they can, and they like to imagine that they can avoid that, but it's not really possible. I want to refer to there's this idea that somehow when you're doing business, that you step outside of the realm of ethics, and that what you're doing is you're just trying to be a business person. And this is I thought very well expressed by the famous Silicon Valley billionaire Peter Thiel in his book 0 to 1, came out a few years back. And in it he says, Google's motto, "Don't be evil," is in part a marketing ploy, but it's also characteristic of the kind of business that's successful enough to take its ethics seriously without jeopardizing its own existence. In business, money is either an important thing or it is everything. Only one thing can allow a business to transcend the daily brute struggle for survival, and that is monopoly profits. So essentially, what he is saying is that business can avoid ethics in its early years and until it gets to such a position of strength that then it can indulge itself in being ethical, because really its position is sort of so bulletproof that it's not going to be undermined by having to put up with the burdens of being ethical. I find it quite astonishing he had the temerity to say that, because I think it is so totally false and wrong. And I want to say that, you know, if you view that ethics is that business is really an endeavor simply to maximize profit, then really what's happening is you are taking everything else and making it subordinate to profit. And therefore you're, you know, I would suggest that why not just simply join the mafia if you're going to make more money as a mafioso. If you want to make people offers that they can't refuse and have them wake up with very undesirable things in your bed, as in the famous Godfather scene, you know, I'll go for it, because your concern is only maximizing profit. It seems totally crazy to me and quite wrong. This is not a new idea, though, because in the sort of august Harvard Business Review back in 1958, there was an article, a well-known and rather controversial article by Theodore Levitt called "The Dangers of Social Responsibility." And Mr. Levitt saw himself as a great realist, and he concludes his article by saying business must fight as if it were a war, and like a good war, it should be fought gallantly, daringly, and above all, not morally. So this is a common theme that we see, is that business is essentially engaged in warfare. And that warfare, again, is one of these morally free zones. And so when you want to engage in business and you're really engaging in war, you don't have to worry about things like ethics. Well, that idea of war for profit has had some rather disastrous, you know, outcomes. And I'm sorry to say, but I think something that has remained rather persistent in American business education. And it was, you know, one rather stark example was on display in the 2008 financial crisis, when we had the collapse of the global economy, largely because the United States banking system engaged in such ridiculous lending practices that it was it created an inevitable collapse. And the people that were doing this were getting very, very rich. But they also knew that that one of these days, what they were selling and selling in the billions and billions of dollars was not sustainable. And this whole point was very well described in two popular movies, The Big Short and Margin Call, both really excellent movies. I hope everybody has seen, if not, very much worth seeing, I believe. When that happened, there was a lot of soul searching, because one of the things that people recognized was that when the market collapsed, that many of the people that were leading the business community at that time, especially in the financial sector, were people that had MBAs, and not only MBAs, but MBAs from like very elite schools. And so they somehow were graduating people that had no sense that, you know, that what they were doing might lead to some kind of dire consequences for society, but they were making a lot of money. So as long as the whole thing didn't collapse. So I think that we need to look for an alternative. And I think that business ethics, it needs to be incorporated in business from the very beginning. And it's not something that is an add-on that you can do at your leisure, because ethics is a part of the way that we conduct our lives, whether we like it or not. In the very simplest sense, ethics is simply the study of what is good and bad, right and wrong. No surprises there. And business ethics is not something that is somehow a separate domain of ethics, in the sense that the ethics of right and wrong, good and bad, are somehow totally distinct. It's simply that we're applying those ideas of ethics to the conduct of business, and there's certain conducts that are going to be conducts and issues that are going to be particularly characteristic of business. And so whereas business tends to focus a great deal on money, and there's going to be a lot of business ethics having to do with things like conflict of interest and integrity of one's products and so forth. But it's still fundamentally indivisible with the practice of ethics generally. Many people think that business ethics is putting all these strictures on business. Well, that's not incorrect. I mean, but it's basically saying, yeah, you shouldn't be unethical. If that's such a difficult stricture, well, so be it. Because no, one shouldn't be unethical when one does business. But I think I see business ethics is very much is focusing on bringing out the best in business rather than just confining it from bringing out the worst. And so one of the critical things about business ethics is that it leads to trust, and trust enables cooperation, and cooperation is power. If we look through the history of humankind, it's our capacity to cooperate that really has distinguished us. We're not stronger. We don't have better senses. Yeah, we have bigger brains, perhaps on a body weight size, but it's our ability to cooperate is our great strength, and that's something that we see in business. Now, nobody that is advocating business ethics is trying to suggest that somehow business can survive without profits. We're very realistic. Businesses need profit to survive and thrive. End of story. And the person who is well known for essentially starting the stakeholder theory is a man named Ed Friedman, and I heard him say, I'm not sure if he wrote it, but I heard him in a lecture once say that stakeholder theory, he said that breathing is essential to life, but we don't live to breathe. And similarly, profit is essential for a business, but it shouldn't be thought that businesses exist simply to make a profit. I would say that businesses exist to serve the greater good, and when they listen because of their ethical sensitivity to others, that serves as an inspiration of what the society and others need, and great business ideas come out of that, and that permits them to engage in cooperation and have trust, and all of that is essential for economic development and growth in building strong societies. Now, I want to say very strongly that I consider myself a business optimist. I see business as an engine of social transformation. And I'd say that no great problem, economic or social, will be solved without the involvement of business. We've recently had we're in the midst still of a pandemic. It seems to be getting near the end, but we never could have responded as effectively as we had without the massive involvement of business on so many levels. Yes, we had to shut down. We went into like remote business activities. We were many doing Zoom from home and so forth. But business was what enabled us to bring our resources together and solve the problems that we were facing. Now, one of the most, I think, powerful examples of business in the positive sense in addressing social issues involves what I call what is business for peace. And it's something I got very interested in, and I had the good fortune of working closely with some organizations at the United Nations to advance this idea of business for peace. And one of my favorite examples of business for peace is the case of Colombia and its 5-decade conflict that came to an end in about 2015. And what you see here in the upper photograph is the President Juan Manuel Santos and me shaking hands for the first time, or one of the first times, with Timoleon Jimenez, the former commander of the commander-in-chief of the FARC rebel group that's depicted below. And for 52 years, they were engaged in this bloody struggle with the people of Colombia. And I've spoken to many Colombians. I was down there on this very topic to study it. And the extent of the bloodshed and the degree of hurt and anger and distrust was massive. So Mr. President Santos was awarded the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize for this reconciliation that brought the FARC to lay down their arms and engage in work with the society and ended a more than 5-decade-old conflict. However, the reason why I bring this up is that I don't think it's actually President Santos. If it were me, I wouldn't have given the Nobel Prize to President Santos, or maybe I would have, but I would have had him share it, because the person the organization that really deserved, I think, the greatest credit was the business community of Colombia. They did something that was so extraordinary, and that is the business community recognized that this conflict had gone on for far too long, and they recognized that they could never really bring the conflict to an end if the FARC rebels, who had been living outside society for decades and had no real skills other than fighting wars or growing and selling drugs like cocaine, they needed to be able to bring those people into the economy. And that meant using businesses to train them and get over the resentment and the hatred and the hurt from so many deaths and injuries, and give them jobs and bring them into society. The president couldn't just dictate that. It took the business community to bring them all in, and that was what led to, I would say, the most important thing, and led them to finally bringing an end to this serious conflict. Now, so let's talk about a conflict that is going on right now in our own society, and that is something that is disinformation. Now, I'm clearly, I began this by talking about disinformation back in ancient Rome, because it's certainly not a new thing, but it's something that has gained a very prominent position in contemporary American society, and something that is going to require our attention, and I hope our capacity to find some way beyond that. And to do that, I want to just quickly go over how disinformation fits into a whole continuum of ideas, from truth to white lies to deceit, actual deceit, to misinformation, and then disinformation. Disinformation among them all is actually designed specifically to harm, and it is frequently considered an act of war, and it's a strategic use of false information in order to bring harm to one's opponent. Now, it can also be in business. Companies can engage in disinformation with their competitors. Interestingly, what happens with disinformation is it destroys the trust, the cooperation that businesses need to flourish, and it destroys and undermines society in general. And that's why I think it's such a pernicious phenomenon. It creates chaos. It succeeds when others spread the disinformation as misinformation, like a destructive virus. And what I mean by that is that when for disinformation to work, it needs to be repeated and it needs to spread. And that usually means that not everybody who is spreading disinformation knows that they're spreading disinformation. They've heard it so many times, and it had enough appeal that they agree that it must be true, and then they spread it along. And that kind of repetition brings it into the kind of information ecosystem. Another interesting example of disinformation is what I would call a negative disinformation, which is when people self-censor because they're afraid that if they tell the truth, it's going to have serious economic consequences for them. And so they won't say anything that will be bringing out what ought to be said in truth. And an example of this, so the very interesting book that came out recently called Red Carpet, and it shows the way that Hollywood, which would seem to be a very, liberal and very concerned with human rights and so forth, have really kind of capitulated and will do anything to avoid offending China. And one example happened back in October of 2019. Daryl Moore, who is the coach of, I think, the Lakers, if I have it right. He's issued a tweet, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong," because there were all these protests in Hong Kong. Well, that got the Chinese so upset, and they basically threatened to completely cancel all of the NBA's programming in China, which would have been a loss of billions of dollars. So what Mr. Mori thought was a kind of innocent statement of solidarity for people standing up for democracy resulted in being threatened to lose enormous amounts of money for his the league, and so he had to kind of make great efforts to make amends. And there's many examples of this. I wonder if I have any water. Sorry, my voice is scratchy. So no, and we see it all the time. Disinformation becomes so embedded in the information landscape that it can become indistinguishable from the truth itself. It's very easy to make disinformation. It's very inexpensive. If you basically need a Twitter account or a Facebook account and a few people to start pumping it out, and you can create all sorts of fake accounts, and it spreads like crazy. And one of the interesting sort of insidious aspects about disinformation is that part of its success is that it'll appeal to the things that we ourselves are inclined to want to support or want. So even if it's made up, and if you thought a little bit more carefully about it, you might find it unlikely to be true. But because it conforms with one's inclinations, one will easily grab onto it and treat it as if it were truth. And it also tends to ignite our anger, which makes us want to be more adamant in sort of sharing this idea. Our indignation is raised. And I have at the bottom of the screen here a quote. It says, "This is actually something that happened to me a few months back, where I was having a chat with somebody I knew, and she said, a study was just released from Johns Hopkins that said that masks do absolutely nothing." Well, she hated the idea that people were having to wear face masks in the stores in her community, and so she heard somewhere that Johns Hopkins had this study that said they were useless, and so that was all she needed to sort of say, well, there you go, let's dump the face mask. Well, I I felt certain that that wasn't correct. And after we left, I went home and I turned on my computer and I went to the Johns Hopkins website, and it said in very, very clear and strong terms how important face masks were for preventing the spread of the coronavirus and for contracting it. So, what should have been rather self-evident, it would have been big news if Johns Hopkins had said this, but somebody said it to her, and she just was all too happy to kind of use that to justify that space masks were unnecessary. So the problem is that when we want to ask people to deal in truth, truth is a very difficult thing, and this is something that somebody that studies philosophy would know, which is that the truth is hard. We want to think that truth is like black and white, or the truth doesn't change. But truth will change as our knowledge changes, as we become more knowledgeable of something, or that as evidence emerges. Truth is not interested in our partisan positions. It might be something that we completely dislike. It can hurt us. We are the saying, truth hurts. And it's true, it does. And it can, and it can be boring. And yet we need truth as a foundation for everything. And if we want to take something that's a falsity just because it actually is more convenient, more conforming to our ideas, we're going to be in big trouble, because you can't build on falsity. It's just not sustainable. So one of the problems is with disinformation is that while it's not new, what is new is the technology. And the technologies are permitting the spread of disinformation on a massive scale that is simply unparalleled in human history. It's just nothing like it. So we all know the usual suspects: Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and there's many others as well. Together, these become vehicles for such rapid transmission of false information, and it works so well because it costs very little. Nobody charges you to set up a Facebook account, and you start setting out fake accounts that start spreading false information, and it just goes like wildfire. There was a very controversial study that came out first with a Wall Street Journal, and then it went to a whole range of newspapers. But there was a whistleblower. I forgot to put down her name, but she worked as a consultant at Facebook, and she kept a whole bunch of documents to show that Facebook knew very, very well that they were being the spreaders of false information, but they did it because it was very helpful to their business. And one of the things that the Facebook engineers discovered was back in 2017, I believe it was, they got rid of the simple thumbs up, like, and they put in a range of emotions that showed anger and happiness and ha ha and so forth. And they found that the thing that kept people on their site the longest was anger. And that was their goal, is to keep people glued to their site and staying with their site. And so they actually use their algorithms to give a higher ranking to angry responses, and those would then be circulated far more than the nice, happy ones of grandma seeing their grandchildren, learning to swim and having their first ice cream sundae. They chose what would be the path of profit maximization over social responsibility. And that is extremely troubling to me. And I think it shows that Facebook really engaged in a betrayal of the public trust, and it's having massive effects across our society, because it's such a big, pervasive platform that reaches so many people, and not only in the United States, but with Facebook has 2.85 billion users. And so their impact on global views is absolutely massive. So I want to say, why does this matter for business in general? And I would say that one of the important things is that our society is facing many troubles, and we need to stay together to be strong. We need to have a cohesive and a sense of solidarity among our fellow Americans. And this is not true for America, but for other societies as well, because our survival depends on this, or our success depends on this. And it's particularly true when we're in what we call the information age. It's now, I think that the pandemic is an interesting example, because the last time that we had a really massive common enemy that the country needed to respond to my recollection, as far as I can tell, it was World War II. And when that happened, the country really came together as never imagined before, or it was just amazing. And so people were saving their toothpaste tubes and their shaving cream tubes, and they turned American business stepped up, and they turned automobile factories into tank factories, and women for the first time got involved in the workforce outside of the home, and the country showed what it was capable of doing. And I think that it's hard to be too certain of this, because but I think it's very reasonable to suggest that the defeat of Germany would probably not have happened had the United States not entered the war. I think that's quite certain. Actually, it was England was hanging on by a thread, and Churchill was horrified and begging Franklin Delano Roosevelt to join in. And finally, when we did, it gave them the extra breathing room they could. They certainly were undomitable in their spirit, but they simply did not have the capacity to withstand the Nazi onslaught. Well, the similar thing that we have now is a pandemic, and yet we have been so divided by the pandemic. It was a common enemy, but the social media divided us enormously. It became a source of just getting people so angry. Now, people have their own opinions, and again, I'm not trying to take sides on this, but I think that there's so much evidence that we've harmed ourselves by the way that we responded to the pandemic. And this is just one. I had actually half a dozen slides like this, and I decided to just put this one up. But this top line here is the death rate among the unvaccinated, and the ones on the bottom are the upper one, which is gray, is fully vaccinated but no booster, and the one on the bottom is fully vaccinated with boosters. And the death rate from people that are boosted is so small, and the death rate from those that are unvaccinated is so high. So it would just seem to be simple, common sense that one would see that this is in one's best interest and get vaccinated. But it became such a political fight in the country, and maybe some of you disagree with me on this, but I just feel like it had prolonged the pandemic, but it also led to so many deaths that, and I had statistics, but I didn't bother putting them up because I didn't want to just go too long. But as I recall, it's led to about the number of excess deaths is extremely high because of a lack of the consensus on taking the vaccination. Now, look, I also want it would be rather realistic for me to have a talk on this topic and not talk about this stop the steal and President Trump's claim that the election was stolen. It has been the most divisive thing. It has caused more division and more extreme emotions than anything I can recall in my life. And as you can probably tell, I'm not a youngster anymore. It's exacerbated our divisions, and it's undermined trust in our government enormously. And I put William Barr here just because he has a new book out, and he was the Attorney General under Barr, and I can give enormous quantities of information that is reliable that would say that Mr. Trump, whether we like it or not, whether we voted for him or not, he lost the election. Mr. Barr said the election was not stolen. Trump lost it. This is in his book. Well, of course, Mr. Donald Trump didn't like that and said very disparaging things of Mr. Barr after he made that comment in his book came out. But the thing is that I think that we have to look at this as a form of disinformation, and not everybody will agree with me. And then I would say that we need to all look very carefully at the evidence. And I've tried to look very carefully, as thoroughly as I can. And I think that it's undisputable. But this is what we've been hearing, is that this is leading to a civil war. And I've heard the word civil war used so many times. And January 6th, I've heard, is just a warm up. And so we have to take this very, very seriously, this idea of a breakdown in our society and putting our actual our republic at risk. So I want to just circle back here, and I want to say that if we remember at the beginning of my talk, I talked about Octavian in the fall of the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic. And we have to ask ourselves, could this happen here? And I certainly can't imagine the United States would abandon its democracy. And yet, democracy has become not such a sacred thing in the United States these days among many members of our society. And this is, again, all exacerbated through misinformation and through social media, and then even things like Telegram and WhatsApp, quiet behind the scenes communications. But I also began and said I'm a business optimist, and I talked about the power of business in bringing, responding to massive troubles like the Business for Peace in Colombia. And I want to point to I think a very interesting piece of research. It's called the Edelman Trust Barometer for 2022. This has come out for, I think, over 30 years. And it's a very substantial piece of work. It involved interviews of research into 28 countries. There was more than 36,000 respondents, and over 1,150 respondents per country. And what they found is that for the second year in a row, the most trusted institution is business. It's seen as less partisan or less more reliable than other things like business or the media. It's even slightly better than nonprofits. And people are looking to business to provide trustworthy information and to take a role in core societal issues. So I would like to say that I think that this is a time when business needs to rise to the occasion and meet the needs of this time. And that means taking on this whole idea of disinformation very seriously. And how we do this is one, I would say that many businesses, larger ones in particular, but even smaller ones, have codes of ethics. It's not common. I've looked at many codes of ethics. It's not common to say that you're committed to the truth. And I think that we need to actually have that embedded in our codes of ethics in businesses across the country, a very serious, clear confirmation of a commitment to truth. America has a valuable place to play in the role, role to play in the world. And we can't underestimate the destruction that business is having on our country. And business needs to say that they need to actually stand up and say no to the disinformation that is having such a deleterious effect on our country. And one particular thing I'd like to say is that I have here this term, business leaders for truth. I don't, it's something that doesn't exist, but I would like to see business leaders come together and take a stand on these issues that are tearing the country apart and try to find a consensus that others will listen to, affirming that they don't have anything in the game other than trying to make the society and their business communities more successful. And I want to conclude by remembering Benjamin Franklin, and many of you probably heard this story, but in 1787, James McHenry was a Maryland delegate to the Constitutional Convention, and he kept a journal, and that journal is currently in the Library of Congress. And on the last day of the convention, Benjamin Franklin was leaving the Congress, and it was over. And there was a woman that was very excited to find out what the outcome was. And she said to him, Dr. Franklin, well, do we have a republic or a monarchy? And Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it. And right now, my friends, I'm afraid we need to keep it. Our republic is a beautiful, strong, and very, something very, very valuable that we need to support. And we need to work hard to keep that republic. And we cannot let these kinds of disinformation tear us apart. So I would like to see businesses stand up for truth and stand up for our country. And if they do, I have no doubt that we will get through this difficult time stronger than ever. And with that, I will say thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. Well, we do have several questions, and I'm afraid we will just get to a few of them if in the interest of time. So I was, as I was trying to sift through them, basically, let me start maybe with something that you just mentioned. We have a question from Mr. Mendola, and the question is, how does one address the issue when people of all self-interest groups, when people of a self-interest group call something as misinformation because it does not fit their particular narrative, when there is good information that challenges that narrative with said information? In a way, we have a similar question. So basically along the lines, right? How do you handle these groups that are maybe because of their self-interest, basically?
So, I have to say that in giving this talk, I was dealing with that very issue because I didn't come to this talk with the idea that I was going to try to offend anybody. And yet I felt I couldn't give this talk in sincerity and being responsible if I was not willing to talk about the way in which we as a country have been divided in our response to the pandemic, and similarly how the issues of the so-called stolen election have had a very, very incredibly damaging effect on our country. All I can say is that truth is not easy, and it's not easy for the person that has decided to try to find it, but it's not easy to even hear it when it doesn't conform with what you want. But this is where we have to be a bit courageous, and we need to try to show that we're serious. We're not trying to offend somebody, and we're not trying to be in this like very counterproductive narrative of sort of left and right. It's not, the truth is nonpartisan, and we need to try to find the truth no matter what it is and whether it supports our view or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. I mean, questions are trickling in, so thank you everyone for participating. I think I see here a follow-up question that maybe fits into that. And as you said, I mean, the idea here is to share thoughts. If disinformation destroys trust, is one of the questions, how can it be earned back? What shall we do? What can businesses do, or in general, the public can do to earn back, let's say, the trust?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And the answer, I believe, is that one has to be truthful, but one has to be also one has to be very, very respectful. We have an obligation that, look, we all have our own particular positions and our own particular biases and our likes and dislikes. And I think we need to be honest about that. But we need to, this is where we need to try to get beyond the polarization and say, look, even if you don't agree with me, let's talk about it. And this is where, why I'm calling for this idea of business leaders for truth, because what needs to be done is to have somebody that has the time to actually do a little bit of research. Part of the problem is that we're very, very, I'm sorry to say this, but I think we're rather lazy in where we get our information and how we give credibility. Do we really cross-reference our information sources? Do we check them? Do we ask ourselves, how credible is it? How likely is it? I'm going to mention something I was going to put into the talk, but I took it out because of time. But there was a show that aired on November 1st called Patriot Purge by Tucker Carlson, in which he said that the right is coming to I forget the term he used. Basically, it was to come and kill the left is coming to kill the right. That wasn't the exact term he used, but that was certainly the meaning. And that, get ready because the Civil War is coming. And I'm thinking, my goodness, this is very, very scary stuff that I'm hearing. Well, check what he said. I'm surprised that Fox lets him get away with that, but it's completely preposterous. And well, some people, I'm probably offended some people right there that like Tucker Carlson, but it was a shocking thing for me to see how extreme it was. And check your sources. Be kind to others, be respectful for others. Let's work, let's have the idea that we're in this together for our common good.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree. I wish we had more time, but I have to say that we need to stick also, in the interest of time or the time of other people. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all the questions. We're gonna keep them, and hopefully, with the series, this EIG series at the center, we will continue the information and the conversation with this series. So I really want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. I want to thank all the members of the audience and those who sent comments and who sent questions. I really appreciate your time. And again, keep an eye on the programming that's coming in the next few weeks. And again, it was a pleasure to have you all, and we're very grateful to Dr. McNulty for an enlightening presentation.
Thank you very much.
all.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.